Thank you. Hello, everyone. I usually don't like standing behind podiums, but the moment I do this, it's complete blindness, and I'm going to try to stay behind here. I'll do my best, but I'm very excited to be here, and I know we all just met, but I need a favor from all of you. Are we cool with that? Favor, even though we just met? All right. My favor, feedback. My favor is that on the count of 3, I'm going to ask everyone to cheer as loud as you can, stomp your feet, clap your hands, whatever it is. Again, this is a concert hall. It's probably pretty used to it. I think I can withstand it. And I want to ask you all to do that for 3 major reasons. The first is we just had lunch. Let's get some energy in the room. So that's important, right? I'm on my 6th coffee. It's not helping. So let's get some energy in the room. The second is there's a lot of effort that goes into putting on one of these conferences. The folks that from day one, they do this in different cities. It's a lot of effort. If anyone's put anything like this on in true spirit of appreciation, I definitely want to give them the loudest cheer possible. And the third reason is that the people that didn't go to this session, I want them to hear it and say, I went to the wrong session. Something cool is happening in that room. I'm kidding, that's not the reason why I want to do it. It's the first 2. So if we can do it on the count of 3, that would be amazing. With me? All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I'm a failed musician, so this is cool for me. I've never been on stage for anything important that people clap to, and it wasn't even for me, but I appreciate it. By quick introduction, Rob Catalano. I've spent the last 20 years building organizations, whether it's building the culture to have them thrive or building technology companies to build better employee experiences. I co-founded WorkTango about 7 or 8 years ago. Innovate Works is another event I run to bring people together like this. I sit on a number of boards. Basically, I'm very passionate about this, almost as much as I'm passionate about music. And my goal is to bring a wisdom of crowds approach on what I've seen, the companies I've worked with, into the conversation today. Now, I mentioned I was passionate about music, and when I think about music, and I think about the workplace, and I think about this session, there's one thing that comes in mind. Feedback gives people a visceral response, whether you're in the music world or you're in the workplace. When I think of feedback, by the way, when I say failed musician, it was with metal bands. I love that stuff, huge Metallica fan. The power and the love of bringing my guitar up to the amp is amazing. And I love it, but other people, my neighbors, they're like, this is ridiculous, it sounds crazy. But that's the same visceral response when we think about feedback in the workplace. Right? And I think it's an important topic to think about because our employees crave it more than ever, and we need it to grow organizations. Before I get into why we're discussing this topic and dive into the actual, exercise and prescriptive things today, I want to tell a few stories to get us in the right state of mind. The story I want to start off with was, everyone knows this company, Ford Motor Company. In 1907, they had an attrition rate. They had an attrition rate of over 700%. And you thought yours was bad. So what did he do, right? He wanted people to sit on the line and build that Model T Ford card, and he created the first ever years of service program. He said, if you're sitting in seat for this long, we're going to reward and recognize you. But some companies today, 100 years later, still use it as the predominant way to give positive feedback or positive reinforcement, right? Years of service. Next story, GE. They popularized the whole concept of performance management back in the 60s, right? The whole appraisal. Companies still today use that as the only way they get feedback in a formal way in their organizations. Third story, the engagement survey, right? Started in the World War by the US government, trying to understand people's feedback while they're out in the field. Again, companies still use it today as the only way to get feedback at a company level. So you're seeing the theme here, right? And the idea, and 2 things I want to bring up to kind of set up the conversation, is that employees don't work in years, which all these processes look and feel like. They work in days and in hours, and we have to rethink our feedback mechanisms and processes to build the companies we all want. And the second reason I bring it up is because problems are durable and solutions change. I have so much respect for HR leaders because the reality is you've been trying to figure things out, a lot in the last couple of years. No book was written on how to deal with COVID or what we're trying to do to build inclusive work cultures or the rapidness of the change management we have going on in our organizations. But the reality is the problems are still the same. How do you recruit, retain, and inspire great talent? But the way we do it has to change because the workforce is changing. The expectations of our employees are changing. The technology is changing. And I tell those stories because I want to set us up to talk about some specific things today. First, what's the real impact of feedback in your organization and why it matters? Right? That's the topic we're having today. So we're going to talk a bit about that. I'm going to spend some time as well with some memorable exercises. Well, I hope they're memorable for really good reasons. But memorable exercise is about really getting a feel of how important feedback is us as individuals, but also I think these are great exercises you can take into your teams as well. Lastly, I want us to talk about how do you think about this prescriptively of getting modern feedback mechanisms into your organization. So things you could take away and actually implement in your company and see impact. I've seen it for decades, right? And I just want to share again some of that wisdom of crowds of what I've seen. So before I do all that, every time I present, there's one slide I show and one question I ask, and it's who cares? You know what, ChatGPT, AI, you type who cares in Google and this is what comes up. Like that is the coolest technology. Like if ChatGPT can do that, then I'm gonna be excited about it. But for now, anyways, so I could talk about why we should care about feedback for an hour, but I'm gonna spend one quick slide because some of you may not be believers. Like I need data and tell me why this is actually important. So why we should care about feedback, first, a lot of studies out there, and this is through Gallup. Again, huge change in impact on turnover and retention. I don't need to tell you the impact and the cost saving when it comes to turnover. You all know that. But again, there's a lot of feedback and data on that. The second is it's not just about the cost saving. Employees are 4 times more likely to be engaged when there's a regular cadence of feedback in their organization. We also know the impact of engagement. Right? It's not just your HR metrics like retention and attrition. It's your business metrics like customer sat, how you grow your organization. So we should care about that. Last reason you should care is unfortunately 14.5% of leaders actually think they're effective at actually giving feedback. And you're going to see some themes today around this. I'm sorry, I actually feel bad for leaders and organizations because I actually think they're the face of antiquated HR practices I mentioned earlier. Hey, here's some feedback that we got that's 3 months old. Maybe have this one conversation where you rate them 1 to 3. They're not even listening to feedback, right? They're all thinking about what they're getting paid and how it's tied to comp. So how do we think about leaders as the major enablement tool? And I think that's a big reason why we should care, because we have the biggest influence on building that culture of feedback in our organizations. Now, before I get into all the theory fun stuff, I want to have a fun exercise. Does anyone know who this is? Anyone? Okay, I didn't think so. I'm here from Toronto. I live in Canada. It's way warmer here. Oh my gosh, it's so nice here. I went for a walk in shorts today. It was awesome. But growing up, when you watch cartoons, when I used to watch I still watch cartoons. When I was doing it growing up, these two folks, Hal Johnson and Joanne McLeod, would come on screen and they're what are they called? The windbreakers? And it was time for body break. It's like, hey kid, stop sitting there for 3 hours watching TV. Get up and move. It was that kind of thing. They still do it today. But they still do it today. It's like 40 years later and they still do this. They're like literally icons in Canada. So I wanted to impart some childhood Canadian memories on you all. But I do spend a lot of time in Austin. WorkTango is actually headquartered there. So I love your state and the people are amazing. People say in Canada they're nice, and they are. But they're more polite. People here are so nice. I love the community that you all have here. So instead of this, I'll say, okay, well, let's do some other exercises. You all know these people, right? Does anyone know this person? Yeah? Yeah, after eating so much barbecue, I think I have to do some like hip hop abs with Shanti. So this exercise involves four volunteers. And again, we only have 45 minutes today, so I actually pre-asked 4 volunteers. Again, they don't know what's happening, so sorry and thank you. But if you can all get up and move to my colleague Victoria, wonderful colleague Victoria, she's amazing, in the back, we're gonna ask you to leave the room. We're gonna talk when they're gone. Okay. So this exercise, I can't say anything because they're still in the room. All right. They're brave. I was like, hey, thanks for being here first. Do you want to be a volunteer? And now they're regretting coming in here early. So I'm gonna have a quick exercise where I'm gonna ask them all to come into the room individually and ask them to do one simple task, and that's to find my clicker. That's it. They're gonna have 15 seconds. It's gonna actually show up on the board, countdown from 15. But what I'm gonna ask you to do is play a different role in how we interact with the 4 of them individually. So these are your roles. When the first person comes in and I say, find the clicker, you're gonna say nothing. We're just gonna watch them awkwardly and they're gonna be confused, but bear with me, it's really interesting. The second person that comes in, you're gonna be positive. Hey, way to go, great job, you're doing awesome. You're not giving them any direction, but you're gonna be really encouraging. Right? Think about that encouraging leader that you have. The third person is you're going to be negative. What are you doing? Do you know what a clicker looks like? Like that type of stuff. I mean, be mean, but don't be mean. But like kind of be mean. If you know them personally, like be mean. Like that's a lot more fun. But again, just say be mean, but don't tell them where the clicker is, basically. And the last one is you're going to actually give specific, hey, you're hot, you're cold, but you're not going to show them and tell them where it is. When we're done this exercise, we're actually going to talk to the four of them really briefly and hear their reactions to this type of feedback they've received. Everything from nothing to positive to negative to there was some interaction there and some support. So that's what we're going to do. They're going to come in the room and I'm going to ask them to find the clicker. And remember, the first one is silent. So if you don't mind, Victoria, bringing the first person in. Oh, wait. Before you do that, I got to hide this thing. Here, you want to hold this? Thanks. Okay, great. Are they all scared? Hello, how are you, sir? How's it going? A little nervous. What's your name? Marcus. Marcus, pleasure. Marcus, I've asked you in here for one simple task. And that task is your job is to find my clicker. You have 15 seconds. I lost it. I don't know where it is. And when I click it, there's going to be a counter, and you're going to have to find my clicker. Okay, cool? So ready, go.
Can I check your pockets?
If you would like.
Who has the clicker? All right.
We just met, Marcus. All right, sorry. Again, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So it'll all become clear in a moment, but thank you. All right. Oh, no, you can, yeah, come back. Yeah, sorry. Hello, how are you? Your name, again, for everyone. Cassandra, how are you? Cassandra, thank you for being a volunteer. It's a simple task. I have one question for you. I lost my clicker, and I can't find it. And I was going to ask you if you can find it, and you have 15 seconds to be able to do that. So when I click the button, you'll see the countdown, and I need some help finding my clicker. So remember, everyone? Okay, here you go. 10 seconds. Oh, thank you so much. Feel free to sit down. It'll all become clear in a second. Thank you so much. All right, we'll bring in the third person. Remember, this one is... How are you? How's it going? Come. Your name for everyone. Your name for everyone. Moses, thank you for being a volunteer. Appreciate it. We have one task for you as a volunteer, and it's basically to find my clicker. I lost it. I can't find it. And I'm going to click a button. There'll be a countdown of 15 seconds to actually find it. So I'll just click it, and here you go. Find my clicker, please. Moses, thank you. Have a seat and it'll become clear in a second. I appreciate volunteering. Oh, yeah. All right, so the last one, remember, directional. So Victoria, if you can send the individual in. Hi there, how are you? Your name again for the audience? Laura. Laura, so there's one task as a volunteer that I have for you. It's actually to find my clicker. I lost it. I'm going to click the button. There's going to be a countdown, 15 seconds to find it. So I'm going to do that now, and please help me find my clicker. I lost it. 10. Okay. So first off, another giant round of applause for the 4 people. Thank you so much. So if you don't mind all just standing up, I have a couple of quick questions for you. You'll kind of get a sense of what this was all about. But the 4 of you came into the room and you had different experiences. One was completely silent. We didn't say a word. One, we were really positive and cheering them on. One, we're completely negative. I felt so bad. Moses got booed. And one was a little more directional, like, hey, that way. So I'm really curious, just a few one-word descriptors of one, how did you feel, right, while you were looking for it, personally yourself? Second, what did you feel about the other people in the room? And third, how did the feedback you received affect your performance? So maybe a 1 or 2 word description. We'll start with the silent world. So.
I trust you, man.
There's a part on trust later. We're going to get away from the speaker.
One word, I felt, self-reflection. I felt determined. I was like, I'm going to find the clicker. But then I was like, I'm not going to find the clicker.
What did you feel about the others in the room?
They were no help at all.
Anything about their personalities or other than helping you?
I saw 2 smiles, so they were getting a kick out of it for sure.
Got it. And how did it affect your performance?
Clearly, I didn't find the clicker.
Fair enough. All right, for the positive one.
All right. I felt motivated noticeably for the clicker. I felt the others in the room were encouraging, and the feedback made me want to find the clicker if I had just 4 more seconds.
Awesome. Moses, what was your experience? What did you feel yourself? What did you feel about the other people?
Okay, let's see. While looking for the clicker, I felt lost. I felt like I would already fail before I started. What did I feel about the others? I didn't like any of them. That's okay. I'm over it. And the feedback. My performance. I didn't even think there was a clicker, so.
Kind of gave up, yeah. And lastly.
Yes, so I felt supported. What did you feel with the others in the room? I thought that y'all wanted me to find it. You wanted me to succeed. And then the feedback how to affect my performance. I knew I was going to get it. I knew I was going to find it.
Got it. So again, thank you so much. Appreciate it. It's one thing to have, feedback models thrown at you or actually look at theory around it, but when you hear the impact and influence that we have on other people when it comes to feedback, it makes a huge difference. Like, it wasn't even the words you said. I saw you physically kind of want to sit down and kind of give up, right? There were some levels of motivation or there was positivity, but not really much help, right? Silent, I felt lost. I didn't feel part of the team. If you actually did a bit of research and asked people, what is the one person that has the most impact on your life? And when you got past partners or spouses or children or parents, managers were 3.6 on that scale of the impact and influence that they have. And we have these conversations all day, right? So I love this exercise because you actually sit and you start empathizing with the other individual, receiving that feedback in different ways. But I also want people to think about their own individual leadership skills from a feedback perspective. If you are the silent leader that does nothing, again, it's still just as worse as kind of giving that negative feedback as well. So again, a couple other exercises we'll do, but a small one to kind of highlight the concept of how important it is. So now that we had some exercises, I want to get into feedback in terms of putting it into practice. Right, let's think about prescriptive things that you can do with your organization, with your team, with your individuals in your company to be able to again, put into practice. I'm not going to talk about the STAR model or the Pendleton model of feedback. I want to get into actual prescriptive worlds. So one question I ask for you is if you ask yourself, what's your feedback rhythm and model in your company? Do you have one that exists for your company as a whole? Do you have one that exists for your teams in your organization? Do you have one that exists from an individual level? And when you actually think back and reflect on this, a lot of organizations, they may have a great structure, but I find most, there's really no structure around it. Like, we talked about why feedback was important, the influence it has on employees, on leaders, on organizations, yet we don't look at this in a way to say we need a structure around it. What I want to do quickly is go through these 3 elements and just give some food for thought, some examples, the things I've seen work really well with my teams or organizations I've worked with. My hope, again, things you can take back into your organization. So first I want to start at a company level. Now, this concept of continuous listening. I always talk about feedback as being we're just going to yell things at the organization, but we need to getting that feedback from employees of what's working and what isn't. And the reality is a lot of companies, as I mentioned earlier, are using that engagement survey one time a year as the ability to kind of formalize that process. The reality is, though, is a lot of companies are moving away from this one time to that frequency to add more agility to this process. And this is actually 2018 data, but what Gartner showed is that companies that were doing the one-time surveys versus the ones that were actually doing other ways to collect feedback, that was at an intersection 5 years ago, right? I'm waiting for the new data, but it's predicted it was going to surpass itself. What I'm seeing every day working with our clients is, again, this is happening. And people are getting a lot more agile in terms of the process of doing this. And what they're doing is they basically have created an evolution of saying, we're going to do an annual survey to then do, everyone's done a pulse survey in the past, right? Pulse surveys are great, but they're the same questions at the same cadence, and people lose interest, right? Because it's just complacency over time. So what people have moved to in this concept of continuous listening is what I call active listening. And active listening is not just about measuring engagement more frequently or measuring the change management process or measuring DE&I. It's about diagnostic feedback of what's working and what isn't. And what I mean by that is continuous listening or active listening, this whole concept, is if you actually take the concept of measurement out of it and think about diagnostic feedback, that's what true agility and true critical feedback looks like. So what I mean by that is it's not just about your engagement survey more often and measuring those concepts, it's asking people what's working and what isn't. It's asking them for feedback. Hey, we just launched open enrollment. Is it working or is it not? And it allows you to build a level of agility in terms of not just knowing how people feel, but what you can specifically do about it or change. Does everyone, you guys all heard agile, right? We all have to be agile. Does anyone know where that came from? Like where it started? Pardon me? The Agile Manifesto in terms of the development process?
Well, like Agile is not really a development process, it's more of a philosophy.
Yeah, it's philosophy. But so the people that actually started taking that philosophy were people in the engineering and development world. And they said, listen, if we just build, we want to build the iPhone. If we do 10 years of research, we build it, we give it to the world, it may suck and no one likes it. We spent so much time and effort and we didn't actually get the right product into market. What Agile development said, and that was called waterfall development. What Agile said is we're going to build something really quickly called a minimum viable product. We're going to send it to the world and we're going to hear, do people like it? Do they not? We're going to get feedback on whether this product resonates with people or not. If it fails, guess what? It failed a lot earlier. It costs way less money, but that's an iterative process. If they waited for the iPhone 14 to be out, we'd never have it, right? They built on a feedback from the market. But that's the way we need to be thinking about our teams. Right? We can't just check in once a year. There's no accountability to do something different. We don't have data for how fast organizations are moving. So a lot of companies are moving to this concept of agility when it comes to getting feedback at a company level, even as simple as that. And when I talk about this, people say, oh, that's crazy. There's survey fatigue. There's no such thing as survey fatigue. There's lack of action fatigue. I work with organizations that literally every week are getting feedback from their teams. And they're doing something about it and they built a structure around it. And the reality is our generation, for most of our organizations, this is an era of a feedback culture. They're used to it. They do it all the time. We're asking for feedback for their Uber and their, what else we got? Glassdoor, you name it. So that was the first major thing from a company level I wanted to just bring up on feedback. The second thing which I've seen companies make huge impact on when it comes to feedback at organizational wide world is the fact that HR has to stop being a filter and being an enabler. Filters are cute for celebrities and stuff, but when companies are doing these surveys and keeping the data in HR, it's really hard to act on it. I work with organizations that are giving that data in real time to every leader in the organization, tens, hundreds, thousands, because guess what? That employee experience, that feedback conversation happens at individual team level. In HR, you can't one size fits all fix everything in your organization. We have to put it into the hands of the people that can actually impact it. So those are just two things I wanted to bring up, again, just as ideas and how you can really infuse feedback to the right people that can actually do something about it. And that actually brings me to teams, right? Leaders are a big part of the equation when it comes to feedback and how we can enable it. So I was like, when we built the company, it was all about leaders being the center of what we do. Yes, there's value to HR, but leaders are the ones that are biggest leverage points we have. So a few concepts here is, when it comes to feedback, do your leaders understand why feedback's important? Like, do they have the data on how it helps them be a better leader or their teams perform? But more importantly, how? These types of exercises, the models that are out there, it's really important. We started training people on empathy when the pandemic hit. Do we really think about feedback and enabling them to be successful? But also, are you enabling them through a structure or a rhythm that we talked about? I've worked with organizations and I've mandated one-on-one meetings for our leaders. Right? Mandate check-ins every quarter to make sure we're talking not about your rating or your appraisal, your personal development plan and feedback on what you can do better. So we have a role, right, as people leaders in our organization to build this structure, to build the ability for leaders to have these conversations. And the main thing of leaders is, despite what you think, they're, I'm going to say arguably, but I would argue all day on it, that they have the biggest influence on your employee experience. So you all heard this before, right? People join companies and leave managers. Some people love this, some people hate this. There are 2 other stats in this research that was done many years ago. One that said the manager accounts for 70% of the variance in employee engagement, and 50% of employees have left a job to get away from their manager at some point in their career. How many people here have wanted to get away from their manager? How many people's managers are here with them? I almost got you. Okay, if you don't believe Gallup, believe Google. Remember the Google? The great, the angry cat there? So I typed into Google, my manager is toxic, hates me, doesn't like me. In French, I'm Canadian, so the French came up. Ignores me, harassing me, is incompetent. There's a Korean show I need to watch. Was rude to me. And when I had to take a screenshot, but the thing that caught my eyes at the bottom, you can't see it, it says report inappropriate behavior. This is all inappropriate. This is literally the stigma of our leaders and organizations because we don't enable them to have the right conversations, right? And that's everything I talked about earlier, whether that's performance management, recognition of rewards, employee listening, you name it, but they're a big part of building this feedback culture, which is important. I would say they're a secret weapon to building a culture of feedback, and this is the way I like to explain it. You have your business strategy, you have your HR strategy. Let's call this our engagement or our feedback strategy. And we think about it as a top up, like we have to figure this out in HR. But the reality is there's a business strategy and a people strategy. If we can get leaders on board and accountable for all the things we know that matters, communication, conversations, feedback, alignment, etc., I like showing this to executive teams to get the non-HR people in the room to understand that this is where we need to get. So I think I'm a bit of a soapbox in terms of how important leaders are, but they're really important to build these cohesive teams that retain and perform and all the things we talked about earlier. Now, some prescriptive feedback on this is that for 18 years now, I've run daily meetings as a whole organization, whether we've been 4 employees or 400 employees. And what we did is it allowed for conversation to happen, but for feedback to happen in real time. So these structures of these huddles where, hey, I have a win, that's great. I have an issue. Something came up, and we have to solve that. And now you're immediately getting feedback to that individual about how we could solve it as an organization or take away the right people to have those discussions. So a cadence of that huddle or team huddle is a really important way to build that connection or feedback discussion. The other one that's really important is kind of taken from the development world are retrospectives. Does anyone do retrospectives in their organization? A couple people? If you haven't heard of them, they're fantastic. Sit people in a room. My team will do this after any event, for example, and we'll say, all right, what went well? Let's share the wins. What didn't go well, right? And now we're aligning and we have a vulnerable conversation about being able to open up for feedback. But more importantly, what can we do different next time? And the idea and concept of just building space for these conversations allow people to have feedback. So when I talk about structure and rhythm, it's like, well, I got to set a meeting. You set a critical meeting like this once a month of what's working in your team or working for one initiative. Now you've opened up that feedback conversation more than you've ever had before. And that's important for us as leaders to be able to do that, and I find teams are a really good way to do that. Last thing I'll say on this, has anyone read Brutal Facts? Jim Collins? Great book. I made every single employee read it when we launched our last company. There's one idea here called Brutal Facts, and Brutal Facts is this. Every quarter, you ask your employees, sometimes it's confidentially, sometimes it's not, you say, what sucked last quarter? Literally, what's a brutal fact in the company? You take all that information, and you say, all right, some quarters there's been 3, some companies it's been 33 a quarter, a really bad quarter. But the idea is you get all this feedback, you put it up on a board, you say, hey team, this is what you said. Here are the 9, 20, 5, 6 themes of what's not working in an organization. You've given us feedback to understand and see this kind of issue in our company. Hey, let's be honest and vulnerable. We can't solve all the world's problems. Can you prioritize the top 2 or 3 that we should focus on? Great, you're a part of this. Now we have the top 3. How do we make this better? Give us feedback. Just building that space in this structure is a really powerful way. I've been doing it in companies for years. And I call it participative management. It's not just asking you, do you like the situation you're in or do you not like it? What do you have in terms of feedback to make it better? Now they're part of the process and part of the conversation. So again, doing this in team levels, I've done it at company levels. Team levels are really powerful and just, again, something I think would work in organizations. Last thing I want to talk about on the direct report side, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I've, again, as I said, mandated one-on-one meetings. It's critical. One agenda item is always two-way feedback, right? Not only feedback for you, but how do you feedback for myself, right? And I always position this to my employees. I don't know if David's in the room. He reports to me, and maybe out there. But I say, how can you make me qualify for my next job, right? But there's always a feedback component in one-on-ones to make sure that we're building it into that cadence and that structure I was talking about earlier. And again, employees are way more engaged when they have these types of conversations. And back to performance management. 8% of companies believe their performance management process is highly effective in driving business value. I have never met the 8%. I meet the 92% that are like, what is going on? Why do we do this? Like, McKinsey had a study that said it's the absurdities of corporate life, the performance appraisal process. But we still do it, right? Once a year. And that doesn't provide a great feedback culture. And I say, change the vernacular in your company. Don't call it performance management, call it performance development. Now it's about feedback. Again, how are you qualifying that person for their next job? So again, sometimes it's just little small nuances in this world, but my goal was to say, when I asked you earlier, do you have a feedback model or a rhythm in your company? If not, how do you structure it in a way that influences these three critical parts? But the second part, and that rhythm, is what are the frequency of that? If you're sitting on the annual world and you're not looking at feedback mechanisms daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly, you have to make it more frequent for how fast our companies move. All right, so did you miss Hal Johnson and Joanne McLeod? You're all gonna go look them up, and I'm telling you, like Canadian icons. So next exercise, it's really easy. All you need is a pen and a piece of paper. If you don't have that, a notes app on your iPhone would work. All you need to do is draw something. So I'll give everyone 20 seconds to just get out a piece of paper and a pen or a device where they can draw something. This will take literally 2 minutes. All right, so everyone's got it. I'm going to give you 6 simple instructions of what to draw on your piece of paper. Pretty simple, right? So we'll go through it right now. First, get a blank piece of paper and pen and draw a small circle near the top of the page. Great, pretty simple. Second, draw a single vertical line from the circle to the middle of the page. Great. 3, draw 2 vertical lines from the circle angled down towards the middle of the page. I'll say it again, a little more complicated. 2 vertical lines from the circle angled down towards the middle of the page. Great. Number 4, draw 2 lines separating from the single vertical line, each of which angles down towards the bottom of the page. Draw 2 lines separating from the single vertical line, each of which angles down towards the bottom of the page. A little more complicated, but pretty straightforward. Some people are not drawing, they're like, I give up. 5, at the end of the angled line stemming from the circle, draw 5 small lines. At the end of the angled line stemming from the circle, draw 5 small lines. I'll give you another second because there's 5, there's lines, more lines. And lastly, at the end of the angled line stemming from the vertical line, draw an oval at the base of each line. All right. Show your neighbor, because they should all look like this. Show your neighbor, share. Not bad. Okay. So, I love this exercise. Okay, so think about it. This should illustrate how hard it is to actually give clear instructions to people on your team, people in your organization. It also illustrates how people interpret things in a different way, even though if you read those again, you'll say, okay, this is exactly how we're supposed to do it. It was very explicit what the instructions were. This also begs the discussion around, listen, I gave you 0 time for feedback to say, hey, can you clarify that? Or what does that really mean? Or do you mean 5 lines? Or like, can I use a highlighter? Like, there was no feedback mechanism to allow you to actually, was anyone really close? Some people are. Yeah? Cool. Most people aren't. But the idea is, like, when we think about, we have employees that have goals and objectives that they need to hit for their team, individuals, etc., and we expect them to hit it. But we change the game on them, right? Things change, priorities change. But if we don't have that feedback loop to actually have that discussion, it becomes, I was gonna put my drawing, but I didn't put it, but it looked terrible. But that's what ends up, right? What we have on a lot of our pages. So, a great exercise. I think if you do it with your team, it really enforces that concept of feedback loops and making sure that, again, you're building that room and space for it as well. Last thing I want to talk about from a feedback perspective is the concept of psychological safety. And I think this is, the reason I want to bring this up because it's so critical to build that feedback culture at the end of the day. And there's you can look up a bunch of definitions, right? The belief that no one will be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas and questions and concerns or mistakes. And I really like this definition. But why is psychological safety important from a feedback perspective? It's a reaction to how people perceive the feedback that you give them. And that's what psychological safety is. If you think the way our brains work is when they hear feedback, there's two things they do. It's fight or flight, right? I'm gonna just remove myself from the conversation, pretend like I heard you and draw something like you all drew, right? Or I'm gonna actually just have that battle because feedback wasn't delivered in an appropriate way. And I'll talk about a really easy method to give feedback, and I think about it every single time I have a feedback conversation. It's kind of ingrained in my mind. So I wanted to share 3 things of that approach that I think are really impactful. So the first one is you need to approach feedback as a collaborator and not an adversary. And every time I think I'm going to have a discussion with someone, I say, listen, I'm not here to break them down. I'm not here to discourage them, right? At the end of the day, feedback is meant to make us better. The approach, though, in which we do it, though, is very adversary, right? And that gets people back to the wall. That's when psychological safety says, I didn't want to ask for feedback again because this is the feeling that I get from a result of it. So sometimes it's not just what you do, it's the mindset that you go in it with. So when you approach any feedback conversation, collaborator, not an adversary. The second is speak human to human. Do y'all remember this from the Jungle Book? The Just Like You? That whole song? The reality is that person on the other end of giving feedback, they have beliefs just like you. They have families that love them just like you. They have things that they want to accomplish in life just like yourself, right? They have hopes, anxieties, vulnerabilities like we all do. Yet when we give feedback, we get into this mode of you need to do something that I'm telling you versus you're a collaborator and let me give you feedback that's going to resonate with you, human to human. And again, it's a mindset thing, but it changes the game on how you actually have that discussion and how that feedback resonates with the individual. It's not fight or flight. It's like, okay, you're with me. Again, think about how much impact our leaders have, as we just discussed earlier. And the last one, I think the most important, and I give a framework for this one, because this I want to break down a little bit, is about replacing blame with curiosity. If anyone senses you're blaming them, you've lost them. The feedback moment is gone, it's broken, good luck getting that trust back. So what's really interesting is, oh sorry, if you're taking a picture. This literally happened about 7-8 months ago when it was warm in Toronto and we were outside. We're not outside on patios right now. I was on a patio yesterday, it was amazing. And I literally, one of my colleagues, Dave, he called in sick, and I was sitting on a patio, I was off that day, and saw him drive by in his car. Dave's not sick. Now, I could go right at him and say, listen, like, you're clearly a liar, like, what are you doing? But there's an approach when it comes to replacing blame and curiosity that you need to think about, and it starts with the mindset I talked about, and this one's a learning mindset. I don't have all the facts. I don't know what's going on. I could lean into Dave, but I don't know what's going on there. The reality, though, was when I asked him later and said, hey, I noticed that you were driving. Like, is everything okay? Yeah, actually, my child had to go to the hospital. Right? My wife couldn't take her, so I'm the one that had to do it despite my state. Imagine I went in guns a-blazing, right? And I approach it with a learning mindset versus that concept of, hey, I'm going to go hit you as not a collaborator, but an adversary. So for mindset's important, so it starts here. The second is state the problematic behavior as an observation. Not that you did something, you broke something, you this. I've noticed you showed up at 9:30 3 times this week. You don't know why they show up at 9:30. Maybe it's that other leader in your organization that has their meetings that always go late, and they're always late for your team meeting. But when you state it as an observation, this conversation can continue to flow, right? They're with you. So that's the second thing. The third is kind of engage them in an exploration. I imagine there are multiple factors at play. What are they? Right, again, when you get them an explanation, now you're doing it together. Right? This is like a feedback mission which you're both trying to get to the bottom of. right? That gets back to that concept of learning and not being an adversary. And the fourth, and it's really powerful, is how do you ask for solutions, right? What would you think needs to happen here? What would be your ideal scenario? How could I support you? Again, we don't have time to get this into practice. I think that when you reflect on this, try this in your next one-on-one or discussion internally, again, it really changes the game in terms from an approach perspective. And it takes time, it takes effort. It's like everything, right? Like Hal Johnson and Joanne McLeod didn't go to the gym one day and became, the specimens they are. It was repetitive. They had to go to the gym repeatedly to get to that state. We have to put this into practice more. Rome wasn't built in a day, but bricks are being laid every single day. So I always love this quote, right? People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And a lot what we're talking about is really about that, right? When you think about psychological safety, we're trying to have hard and open conversations, which some people react differently to. Some love, some don't, but we have to be really conscious of how we build that feedback discussion, again, in the space to do it. Last little exercise I wanted to do with a couple of minutes left is that I think psychological safety is really built on one key component, and it's trust. And I think if you have trust in your organization, that's when you start building a feedback culture that's really critical. I want to do a quick exercise, and then I'll get to my last point on trust. But can everyone pull out their calculator on your phone? If you have a real calculator, please, I want to see it. Like, I have one, and I'm not embarrassed at all. Like, I love it. So pull out a calculator. And I want you to type in that calculator how many employees you have in your organization. All right, everyone's got that. They're staring at the number. Now you want to multiply that by 35,000. Great, press equal. So you're looking at a number. Rob, why 35,000? Individual human beings, employees, make 35,000 decisions a day. You cannot control them all, you don't know what they are, and they make them in your organization. So every single day, that's the number of decisions happening in your organization. You can't control them all, as I said. We have to build a level of trust and open vulnerability with feedback conversations so people can believe that they can trust when things go well and they don't go well in your company. I always say, you're either building trust or you're eroding trust in your company. There's no in between. There's no purgatory of trust. Ask yourself in your organization, ask your HR team, your executive team, are we building trust today? And if you're not, you're eroding it. So you have to be really intentional in how you approach this. This is what helps support, I think, one of the biggest pillars and foundations of building a feedback culture is this trust level. Last thing I want to say, we talked a lot about giving feedback, but we didn't talk about asking for feedback, and that's really tough for people. And we do that all the time, at WorkTango, but again, it's a muscle memory that you have to build. So I have one piece of feedback when it comes to asking for feedback. Don't ask for feedback. Ask people for advice. And the reason is that, one, people love giving advice. Oh my gosh, can I get your advice on something? Yeah, I'm gonna give you my advice. And they're gonna give it to you. Second is, people don't like giving negative feedback, but they will tell you what you can do. One of the things I've changed in operations, especially with employee surveys or performance management, I don't say, what would you do next? Or sorry, I wouldn't say, what do you feel about that employee? Do you feel they should be rated a 1 or 2 or 3, or do you feel they've done something in the past? I say, what would you do moving forward? It's action oriented, right? Would you rehire that person? Would you give them the highest compensation possible, right? So there's a difference and a nuance when it comes to people's advice. They're not gonna tell you about yourself and give you feedback that might be hard, because negative conversations are hard. They're gonna tell you what they think you should do. And that's a very, very interesting and powerful nuance in the concept of feedback. And lastly is, any feedback, all the studies out there show, whether it's positive or negative, that it's valuable when it's action-based. So when you ask people for advice, they're gonna give you that forward-thinking action-based versus what they thought about what you did in the past. And I think it's just a really powerful thing. Try this week asking someone, hey, do you have any advice for what I could do differently on that presentation? It's gonna change versus, do you have feedback? They'll be like, I don't wanna give you feedback, it's negative and it's hard, and they don't want to engage in that conversation. So again, in the spirit of making ourselves better and qualified for our next jobs, try that. So, I wanted to end with a couple of things. I love this world, I love HR people, I love building great companies. If you wanna connect, that's coffee, but we can do beer, we can do whatever. That's my LinkedIn profile, I'd love to be able to meet with you all. Second is, I'm a failed musician, so that's why that's there. But I'm the biggest Maple Leaf fan on the planet. Like, huge. I'm so mad my flight today is during the game. I'm hoping my flight gets delayed. Like, I'm hoping I'm stuck in Dallas because I have to go home tonight. But that being said, my company is based in Austin, right? The Stars, any Stars fans? Some Stars fans? Okay. I'm here, so I have to go for the Stars. So a couple things I thought last minute would be really great for our team is that for our volunteers, at the corner there are 4 blankets, Dallas Stars blankets, that we have for you, so you can cheer them on. I'm cheering them on too. If we meet in the finals, no chance. Like, it's the Leafs, hands down. Also, I thought it'd be fun. There's about 20 of these at the WorkTango booth. If you want them, just go grab them, chat to our team, and they're just for you, because you came to this session and you celebrated and you clapped, and we had a great time together, and it's exclusive to this room. So if you see anyone getting a blanket that wasn't in this room, like, we're all HR people. We can tackle each other. We can't tackle our own employees. I'm kidding, but again, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much, and hopefully there was some real solid takeaways you can take. If not, and do my job, but thanks again. Cheers.